Hi, everyone. Welcome to the second workshop of the RollApp Draft Hackathon. Super, super excited for this one and so excited to see you all join us today. I am going to get started straight away by just inviting our speaker to join us on the stage. Who'll be sharing all about RollApp tokens, incentives, and bootstrapping liquidity. Do say hi in the chat. Tell us how everything is going, how you're doing, and feel free to pop any questions that you have throughout in the questions tab. Hi, Barry.
How's it going?
All good, all good. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm just going to share the link to our Discord community as well so they can join.
Sounds good.
Awesome.
Yeah, and in the meantime, I can just explain to you guys that since I'm anticipating people to be writing fun stuff and comments throughout in the chat, if you can pop any questions that you have in the questions tab, they won't get lost in the chat, and that would be very helpful. And yes, Barry will be sharing the Dymension Discord server, which will be really useful for you guys to get on there, to ask questions, kind of chat to other people as well. And unless you're already in the Encode Club Discord, I highly recommend that. You can go to the dedicated RollApp Draft Hackathon channel and get all the support that you need. So I'll share the link for that right now in the chat as well. And if there's anyone who has already started building or knows what they're building, then please do share in the chat. I'd be very interested to hear what you're all thinking of doing. And yeah, we also did a team formation session yesterday, which was really, really nice. And hopefully there will be some good teams coming out of that. But if you're still looking for team members, don't worry. Even if you missed the team formation session, you can still team up. I'm going to share the team formation dashboard where you can basically just contact people via DMing them on Discord and just chat to them there and kind of see if it's a good match. So I'll share that now as well.
Awesome. And I shared this live stream to the Discord community, so people join if people are interested. Glad to have people from the Discord community join, and that'll be awesome to talk to them as well. Yeah, just glad to chat today and also next week about a wide range of topics, including liquidity, governance, all the nerdy fun stuff, and hopefully having people build cool stuff.
For sure. Yeah. Feel free to share your screen whenever you're ready. And I'm super excited as well to get into the more. Or's workshop was amazing, but now we're kind of getting into the nitty gritty, so that will be really exciting.
Yeah. So let me not raise my hand, but share my screen. Awesome. So I'm going to share in this talk, I'm going to share the overview. First of all, can you confirm that I'm actually sharing my screen?
Yes, we can see it perfectly.
Awesome. So I want to start this conversation between me and everyone here in describing first, like, what are RollApps in general? What are we trying to build? What are we trying to build in like this idea that is Dymension? And then give an overview of what you get out of the box with RollApps or RollApps, and then kind of like move into like showcasing how it actually works. So at a high level, a RollApp is a blockchain. It's similar to any Cosmos blockchain. It's similar to a Ethereum blockchain. You have apps on a RollApp. You mint tokens on a RollApp, and there's some governance on a RollApp. On a RollApp, instead of deploying your own smart contract application on an existing blockchain, for example, Ethereum or Arbitrum, Optimism, a RollApp comes with an SDK that's built out of the Cosmos SDK, for those who are familiar. So it comes with ability to mint tokens, ability to distribute those tokens to to stakers and the RollApp team, to the community pool, which is like the DAO, the distributed autonomous organization. I'll get that into that a little bit later. It allows governance, decentralized governance out of the box, which is going to be a talk for next week. And it allows for other things as well. But this talk in particular is about creating those tokens, incentivizing users to come to your rollup, and then also bootstrapping the liquidity, which is an important part of getting your token to be priced in an open market. So we'll start in the documentation, which I think is it's a good resource for a lot of people. We're always improving it, and most importantly, at the end of the day, Dymension is still a fairly new protocol, even though we've been working on it for 2 years. So if you ever have issues with the docs, if you have any things that are open-ended, please feel free to reach out to us in Discord or message me in Telegram. My handle is Shaolin_flow. And it's really important that we get the feedback from the builders, because with this, we'll be able to rapidly increase and adapt to what people want and people need, and hopefully get people to easily and more easily deploy these things that we call RollApps. At a high level, the RollApps that you're deploying, they're going to be very easily deployable. So you're going to have infrastructure service providers that are going to help you, or you'll be able to do it yourself. The infrastructure part of deploying a rollup, like managing the node, managing the server, that is not a part of this talk. We'll talk about it a bit later, but just know for future reference that it's going to be easy. It's either going to be through like a rollup service provider, which is just like a DevOps company, or you can do it manually yourself if you're comfortable with that. And we try to make it as seamless as possible, and we're still working on rapidly developing the key products to make it better, or other service providers will help that. When we create a rollup, one of the first things that we think in crypto is there a token? How are we gonna distribute that token? What does it even mean to distribute it? How do I get it on pricing it? Who's gonna trade it? Where is it gonna be traded? And a lot of these questions, they kind of hold back a lot of developers from actually deploying crypto applications, or now RollApps, which is trying to make it easier. The goal here is to make developers like you guys, like everyone that's joining crypto or is in crypto, to less focus on figuring out the whole entire scope of deploying a crypto application, which includes the business side, the economics, which includes the tech side. We want to make it easy, and we try to make it easy to, create the token, distribute the token, price the token, and then focus on your application. So in this talk, I'm going to talk about first how we create the token, then how those tokens are distributed, then how you can move those tokens to a liquidity pool and price those tokens. And when you move those tokens to a liquidity pool, you'll have incentives from external blockchains, such as Dymension, that helps people be incentivized to bring more liquidity to your token. So the first thing that I would start when you're developing a rollup is to go to the Learn section. And there's an ELI 5, but what I want to focus on today is the tokens. Now, the rollup creates a token and it mints it. So what that means is that when you mint a token, you set the denomination, which is your rollup token name. So for example, if you're RollApp X, you can call it Rax. If you're Ethereum, you call it ETH. If you're Dymension, you call it Dime. And most importantly, you set the current inflation rate, which is the initial inflation rate, out of the total supply. And you set the target inflation rate. So what is the goal at the end of this X period? And then you also set the amount of time it takes to actually get to that target inflation rate. So for example, if you have an 8% beginning inflation rate, and this is out of the total supply. So for example, if you have 1 billion tokens on the Genesis event, which includes, for example, your team's tokens, if there's like investors that you have, or if there are airdrops that you do, and other sorts of token creations on the Genesis event. And what the Genesis event is the first block in your blockchain. The RollApp is a blockchain, and the Genesis event is the first block. So that's where, before the Genesis event, you go and you create an airdrop website. You distribute your tokens to maybe NFT holders or a token staker somewhere, or however you want to kind of market your RollApp. And this is like from the previous talk, is that you want to market your RollApp. And one of the ways to market your RollApp to the existing community is obviously an airdrop, because that gets people excited about your RollApp or your application. So when you're considering the current inflation rates here, or the initial inflation rate, you are taking it from the total supply. So it accounts for all of the tokens, and then it multiplies that total supply by this inflation rate, and then it divides it by the minute. So it divides it by a large amount, and then it kind of reiterates every minute it mints a new token. But what is important for developers to understand here is what you want as the initial inflation rate and what you want as the target inflation rate. Now, as a RollApp, you can have 0% or you can have 1,000%. This inflation here is primarily to incentivize people to hold your token and stake your token in your application. And it's also, on the other end, it increases the total supply of tokens for your application, for your RollApp. So what that means is, if you have more tokens in the circulating supply, then that means there's more tokens in the market, and could potentially create a sell pressure on the token. So generally, there's like two ways to go about this. One is to say, do zero inflation, or do something very minimal that you can actually create a sustainable supply and demand balance between creating new tokens and having people hold them, store them, or buy them. The other end is to create very high inflations, or high inflation, what you kind of look at, like a lot of countries in the world that don't have sustainable economics, they have high inflation. And that could hurt you in the long term, but that could also bring a lot of new activity to your RollApp. So if you have 100% inflation or 1,000% inflation or something crazy, and you are still holding kind of like a balance of price, then a lot of people will be interested in your application, or a lot of people will be interested in your token, and then they'll be interested in your application. So when you're creating the mint, it's setting the initial inflation rate and the target. And it kind of simulates the Bitcoin halvings, where it starts at one end and then decreases to another end after a certain amount of time. Here it's time rather than hash rate. The way to mint these tokens, and what am I actually showing you, is a part of the Genesis file. And what the Genesis file is a JSON file. So if you can see my screen here, and Clara, can you confirm that you see my iTerm, which is like the black terminal screen?
Yes, the EVM RollApp.
Exactly. So when we install the RollApp EVM, so when we start creating the RollApp EVM, you want to go to the Genesis and Launch section overview, and you want to make install the GitHub repository for the RollApp template. And this includes the modules for minting, distributing, and fees. So when you make install, we'll get to this section called RollApp init, and we get this. So what we will have is we'll create a example Genesis file. So what I've done here is I'm initializing a new chain, our RollApp chain, with the chain ID here, and then my key. The key is added to my local machine, which you can add here, which is just the public-private key pair. So when I create it, it outputs a Genesis file. Now we can't read this, so I'm gonna show you in a prettier format the actual output, which is stored in the RollApp EVM directory. So if we scroll through this, it seems quite intense, but there are actually key parts that we're looking for. And each part that we need to see is in the customized section of the Genesis section. And what we want to focus on today is particularly right now is the mint section, where we stated that we set the inflation rate. So here we set the current inflation rate and then the target inflation rate and the rate of change, which is by how much the current inflation rate is reduced by to get to the target inflation rate. Once the current inflation rate is the target inflation rate, we just stay there. The target inflation rate is changeable parameter, which we'll get into a bit later next week. But that means governance or the RollApp stakers can vote to change the inflation rate. Now, you want to get kind of community involvement and you want to make sure everyone's aligned, but this is in the power of the RollApps community. This is the distributed governance of the RollApp. The next part, when you are minting these tokens, is to distribute these tokens. And there is a high-level overview of how these tokens are distributed in the Learn section, but it's really to three entities. It's to the sequencer, which is who is running the machine. So for example, if you're running the infrastructure for your RollApp, then you can take all the mint to yourself. Or if there's a RollApp service provider, maybe they request or they require to run a RollApp, 5% of the mints go to the sequencer. This by default is set to 0. And it's really a negotiation between the RollApp, which is the RollApp builder, and the RollApp community, and the service providers. But we set it to 0, and it's kind of a future parameter that people will be interested in. The next and probably the most important entities that receive minting rewards are the stakers. So just as if we go to Dymension and we go to the staking, we'll see a lot of validators and people staking their tokens to get airdrops or to get the APY or the mint, actually. It's the same thing on the RollApps. So we want people, or we want RollApp teams to have people stake their tokens and participate in the same way that people participate in Dymension itself. So when you have a RollApp, when you create a RollApp, you'll set a certain amount of governors, which is similar to the validators, and people will stake your RollApp token with those governors. With that, the stakers will get rewards, which includes the minting, the new tokens that you're creating, and the fees, the gas fees. And those will help incentivize people to not sell the token, or to at least be active, to hold and be a participant in the RollApps community. At the end of the day, holding a token enables you to participate in governance and to accrue a lot of the value that a RollApp gets. So for example, if there's a lot of value coming in fees, and then the fees are distributed to the stakers are the token holders. So a lot of the value from the RollApps activity goes to the token stakers. That's an important aspect of the whole system, because it's a part of the marketing, which was discussed before, and how to get like people interested in your application, and how to get people interested in your RollApp, how to get people to join your community. And now it's the economic side of how to incentivize people to stay in your community and to participate in this cool thing that we call distributed governance and decentralized applications. The last part that is eligible to get token rewards is the community pool. And for those that are not familiar with Cosmos, or maybe decentralized or DAOs, DAO treasuries, a community pool is a wallet that's controlled by the RollApp governance, so the stakers and the governors. And the community pool, the wallet, can send tokens to any address. So it can send tokens to maybe a multi-sig that promises to create documentation for your RollApp, or another service. And this is quite useful for decentralized governance and incentivizing people to contribute to your application without kind of from afar, in essence, from the side, like decentralized governance side. And this is the economic way to do it. So for example, if we go to the launch section and in the distribution, there are two key parts here. One is the community tax, which is what percent of the new mints and also what percent of the fees. So totaling together, we'll call them rewards. What percent of the rewards go to the community pool? A lot of times it's 0. So some chains, for example, Dymension, every time it creates new tokens, it doesn't send it to the community pool. The community pool was funded on Genesis. Or you can have it at 0 forever. This is also a question for you as a RollApp builder. Do I want some of my tokens to be sent to the community pool, or some of the RollApps tokens, the new ones that are created, to be sent to the community pool for more active governance? Or do I want the governance to more focus on changing certain parameters rather than distributing funds? So if you want your RollApp stakers to distribute funds for certain things, like creating docs or creating certain applications, or incentivizing people to actually build on your RollApp, because what you can do is provide grants through these community pools. or decentralized grants in essence, because, or open committee, however you want to call it. So for example, you can send tokens in tranches. So 10% will be sent when we agree that this team will build an application on our RollApp. 50% will be when it's deployed, and 40% will be sent after, say, 3 months of successful operation, however you want to quantify that. So this is a potential way to incentivize people to build on your RollApp. So there's a lot of interesting ways, and this is also important to note that this is done in an open environment, because these are through the stakers of the RollApp. The next one is the base proposer reward, which was, as I previously discussed about the sequencer. You can leave it at 0, or if you want to allocate tokens to a particular address that is operating the machine, then set it to above 0. The next part, so here we discussed creating tokens, minting, and we also discussed distributing those tokens. One thing that I didn't mention, which I briefly mentioned, was fees. The fees are set they're set in 2 places, but what is important is that it's best to set the fees in your RollApps token, but you can also offer to charge fees in multiple tokens. This is something a bit more advanced that we don't need to get into right now, but these fees that are paid by the users, they also go to the stakers, or to however you set up the distribution. So it's the fees plus the mints that are distributed to the community pool, the sequencer, and the rest, if we take these 2 numbers, the rest will be distributed to the stakers. The next thing that I want to show you is more of a visual aspect of this system, and it's on the portal. When you're creating a RollApp, you set aside a certain amount of tokens to your team or to a liquidity pool. So for example, this may be to a thing that you call a foundation or organization for sustaining your application RollApp. The tokens that are created on Genesis for this entity can be used to open a liquidity pool on, for example, Dymension. So when you create your RollApp, and when you're creating it, one of the things that you want to do is to set this address that is going to receive the token to this particular field in the Genesis file. So if we look at it in the Genesis file, it's hub Genesis. And what this says is this address will receive tokens, and it's going to transfer to Dymension prior to the dispute period. Or what we can say is when the application, when the RollApp is launched, immediately it's going to transfer tokens to Dymension, and most likely for the purpose of opening a liquidity pool. So you allocate tokens to this address, and this address has the ability to, for example, open a liquidity pool, or has the tokens to open a liquidity pool. It's quite simple to open a liquidity pool, and it's important that there's an important aspect here is that when you create a new liquidity pool, you select your RollApps token and you select Dime, and you put in your RollApps token plus a certain amount of dime, however you want to price it at. The market will adjust how they see it, but you can initialize the price. And then a pool is created. So it will be one of the listed pools. As a RollApp, besides getting grants from the foundation, which is quantified about 10,000 or more dime, there is our protocol incentives that are streamed to the RollApps or the RollApp tokens or the RollApp pools. So when a RollApp is created and a RollApp pool is placed on Dymension, Dymension streams tokens to that RollApp's pool to increase the APR. So here we'll see the base fee is 7%, which means the swap fees in relation to the amount of liquidity is 7%. I think it's averaged out over 7 days. But then there's another 100% of rewards that are sent from Dymension itself. Dymension has over $2 billion in reserves to fund these incentives. And what these incentives do is someone will now have to purchase your token to open a position in the liquidity pool, to add liquidity. And then they'll bond it, so they'll manage it. This will increase the liquidity or the amount of value in your liquidity pool and help you bootstrap, or what we call bootstrap, but create a token that has certain amount of value. Now the price can go up and could go down, but with more liquidity in your pool, the less slippage there will be, or the less difference in what people get from what they expect when they're trading your token. And this is super critical when you're creating a token in an open market. That token has volume, which means people are actually trading it, and it has liquidity, that people don't lose a ton of money on a small trade, or a big trade doesn't, or they could even handle a big trade. So when you create that token, so when you create your RollApp, not only are you setting the inflation rate, you're also setting like who will move those tokens to Dymension and open that liquidity pool. Because if we go to the beginning of this discussion, the RollApp is a blockchain. Dymension is a blockchain. They're connected with a bridge. The bridge is to move tokens from one blockchain to another blockchain. So when the tokens are created on the RollApp, you want to set a certain amount of tokens aside for this address that is going to transfer, to bridge from your RollApp blockchain to Dymension blockchain and open a liquidity pool. When you open the liquidity pool, within a certain amount of time, Dymension will stream rewards to your RollApp. Currently, the process goes through governance. So you can see AMM incentive number 2, AMM incentive number 1. This process will be automated. We're aiming for end of summer or middle of summer to automate this process. So when someone creates a liquidity pool related to a RollApp, immediately tokens are being streamed from Dymension. And Dymension, again, has a lot of tokens specifically reserved for helping teams bootstrap their tokens, which is super, super critical in building applications. So if we go back to the beginning, And I actually want to, during this discussion, I'm looking at these docs, and I actually want to improve them because they're not really explaining what a token is for. But when you're creating these RollApps, one of the key benefits is that you have these certain parameters or these certain modules built into your application that you can use to create these tokens. So here we discussed the minting, which was the setting the inflation rate and the target inflation rate. We also discussed distribution. So how these tokens are, how the fees and how the tokens are, the newly created tokens are distributed. So it's the community pool gets tokens, the sequencer gets tokens, and the rest go to the stakers. And how those tokens are bridged to Dymension without needing to wait for any period, any dispute period. So it goes to this address, and those tokens are bridged over to Dymension to create a liquidity pool. This is generally a high-level overview of how the tokens are created, how they're used to incentivize people to stake their tokens on the RollApp, and then also alternatively to move some of those tokens to a liquidity pool on Dymension. So when you're creating these tokens, or when you're thinking about like how much tokens should I mint, how much tokens should I allocate to the liquidity pool, how many tokens here and there, keep it simple. I would aim maybe for 5% as a general benchmark to move to a liquidity pool on Dymension. For staking and APR, it's really, it could be from 0 if you're looking to maintain like a 0 inflation token and maybe even deflationary token. Or if you want to incentivize, I know some teams are doing low inflation rates, less than 10%. And some teams, if we look back in like the history of crypto, you could do thousands of percent, like Olympus. So it's really up to you on the inflation rate, but know that it really is as simple as initializing a Genesis file with RollApp EVM in it, and then just changing it manually, going into the mint section and changing the inflation rate. The inflation rate here, again, is from the total supply of tokens. So when you're adding tokens to the Genesis file, and this is done through the bank and the accounts. So here we can add a Genesis account with a certain amount of tokens. That will increase the total supply, and that will determine how much inflation or how many new tokens you're going to mint every period. It may seem like a lot of going on, but it's really, you're creating a few addresses, or you're creating addresses, for example, from your airdrop, your team, maybe like a private organization, like a foundation, not for profit, that helps manage the blockchain. You're setting the minting, the inflation rate, the target inflation rate, and you're setting how they're distributed. That's in essence what you have to set to create the token. You set the address to move those tokens, some of those tokens that are allocated in the add to Genesis account. and then you're able to create a liquidity pool. And that's pretty much it at a high level of what to expect when you're creating tokens, minting, distributing, when you're trying to incentivize for the stakers, for example, and then when you're trying to create a liquidity pool so people could actually trade your token. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for now and open it up for any questions.
Yes, I think there's been a few questions in the chat. I've put some of them in the questions tab and some more have come through there. So if you maybe want to start with the ones in the questions tab, that would be really helpful.
Okay, let's start from which one?
So it's kind of, if you go from the bottom, that will be in chronological order.
Gotcha. So here we are building an EVM token, which we can readily build using the RollApp without having to write the smart contracts.
I think a follow-up that was in the chat was that someone then clarified that you still have to write a smart contract for your project. But
yeah,
the person asking the question is then wondering what exactly the rollups provide.
Yeah, so the rollups provide these modules like for minting tokens, for distributing tokens, for the governance of the rollup, for a lot of things. For example, fees, setting the fees for your rollup, the token fees, adding the accounts of like who is going to receive the tokens in the bank. Again, how are those tokens distributed to your stakers? The ability to stake, the ability to change certain parameters and through governance. All of these are already existing in your RollApp, and they're accessible with any command. So, for example, if you want to change a parameter for a module, for example, if you want to change the target inflation rate, you would go to submitting a proposal to the RollApps community, and it would change it automatically based on the governance vote. So there are a lot of things that come with the RollApp, but particularly for developers, it's creating tokens, distributing governance, and for the ability to actually change anything like inflation rate, distribution of tokens, and so on and so forth. But the core application, the differentiator between all of these rollups, is in the smart contract. It's just you don't have to create the token logic, or you don't have to create the token distribution and all of that stuff in the app. The app is related to whatever you're building. So if it's an NFT marketplace, it's an NFT marketplace app. You don't have to deploy certain contracts for creating tokens, for distributing those tokens, and changing how the governance actually works. The next one is, can you please share some of these samples of good and bad inflation parameters in written form? This is kind of hard to say what is good and what is bad, especially in written form, but I would say if you look historically, the higher inflation, the more difficult it is to sustain a decent token price. You can really do zero inflation rate if you want. There are certain projects like Kujira and Curve that do zero inflation rate. You can do a zero inflation rate for these RollApps, and it will be similar to a smart contract on Ethereum that has zero inflation rate, but still accrue the gas fees to your stakers. So which a smart contract on Ethereum doesn't do. So the stakers wouldn't receive minting rewards because it's zero inflation, but they would get all of the fees from that rollup, from your blockchain, to your stakers. So that's one of the cool things that a rollup has over a smart contract is that all of the fees still go to your stakers, which is your token at the end of the day. Do we need to have a network of validators, or do we use... Yeah, so the RollApp doesn't have validators. It's not distributed similar to Dymension. You can use a service provider that just like spins up a node for you or a server for you and just manages it for you, but you don't need a distributed set of validators that like in a Cosmos chain or in a regular blockchain. Here you have one node managing your server, running a thing called a relayer, which is just it's a bridge. It's how the bridge actually functions, but you don't need to manage multiple nodes. You don't need to manage anything. Most of it will be provided by a few service providers, but we will, and we are working on increasing Roller. If you're familiar with Roller, it's a CLI tool that we helped people bootstrap RollApps on previous testnets. And we're increasing that and improving that for production. So it's as simple as a few commands to maintain a RollApp. And you don't need to like request people to, hey, do you want to run my RollApp as a validator? This is out of the box, super simple to do. Do RollApps come with inbuilt risk management mechanisms that help minimize liquidity, supply shock in the event of a very high inflation rate? Risk management mechanisms that help minimize liquidity supply shocks. I'm not exactly sure what you mean by liquidity supply shocks in essence here. If you're saying that if there's so high inflation, yeah, I guess the risk management mechanism here would be for governance to actually change or increase the amount of tokens that are, or to decrease the inflation rate in essence. So the risk management tool here is for governance to vote on this parameter, which is in the mint, is to vote on the inflation rate change and also the target inflation. So if the current inflation is, say, 100%, 1,000% or more, and that is creating a liquidity supply shock, which is affecting the price, the governance can vote to decrease the target inflation rate and increase the inflation rate of change. So for example, if the current inflation is 1 or 100 and the inflation rate change is 100, the next inflation epoch, so you also have to change it to a short amount of time, so you can do like a day here. The next epoch, the next day, the current inflation will decrease by the inflation rate change until it gets to the target inflation. So if you set that to 0, then you could decrease the inflation to 0 within a day by changing the inflation change epoch identifier to a day, and also changing inflation rate change to whatever the current inflation is. So that could be a fallback case to decreasing inflation. I apologize. I thought I was sharing the screen, but it's a part of the Mint module that you would change the parameters for this. Yeah, and the question from Prince Israel continued. How does Dymension help in mitigating lending and borrowing risk and balance liquidity pools across various chains integrated with the RollApp? Dymension is focused on bootstrapping and providing incentives to the liquidity pools for RollApps on Dymension. Lending and borrowing risks, other derivative applications that kind of like are adjacent, they take on other properties that kind of don't affect Dymension and don't affect how the relationship between the RollApp and Dymension. In essence, it's the other application's problem. are you able to set a burn mechanism into the RollApp? You can do it manually right now by sending the community by sending tokens to a burn address, but we may do that. We may create a default mechanism or generalized default mechanism for burn, but we have to kind of like see what you guys are interested in and help you guys build that out. If there's a lot of demand for a certain way to burn tokens, for example, maybe like it depends really on how you want to send those tokens to the burn, because every application is a bit different. But my suggestion would probably be for a smart contract app to send those tokens to the community pool address. In the community pool, you can then decide to burn them, or you can decide to distribute them to other participants. But you could also do that again on the smart contract layer and send those tokens to a burn from there, or send them to a burn address from the smart contract itself. Can we use the generated token in our smart contract? Yeah, the token is registered as an ERC20 token, so you can interact with it. You can interact with it natively. It's ETH native, so your RollApps token is considered ETH within like the Solidity framework. Or you can also create a ERC20 representation, but the token is transferable as ETH would be in Ethereum. Are the RollApp infra providers already live? Are there any dev services we can use for testing? I would currently run the RollApp locally. And then if you want to deploy to a testnet, we're going to open that up pretty soon to a public, for you guys to easily deploy to a public testnet once you guys are ready. But that'll be next steps. There are infra providers. We have a few that we work with, but they're mostly focused right now on providing mainnet services. We had 1 or 2 teams that did the previous incentivized testnet, but we're focused more right now on getting a live production set so people could deploy on a mainnet as well. But for infra providers, for testnets, it's going to be a new set in essence is coming now or pretty soon. And we're going to open up the testnet to more builders. But for now, I would recommend to run it locally, to run your RollApp locally, and without the need of thinking, hey, there's a bridge, there's Dymension, there's my RollApp. For you, it's just a RollApp. It's your one node and super simple in your computer blockchain. Will we see a live coding session building RollApp from Genesis to a smart contract app? We could. For now, this is a high-level discussion about like what you get out of the box, but we'll try to get that in as well after the few workshops. There is one point here that I want to address. There is creating a RollApp in Genesis and creating the Genesis event of the RollApp and just running the infrastructure, which is important to know. And then separately, there's creating a smart contract app. You can move, for example, you can create smart contract apps for Ethereum, from Arbitrum, Optimism, or your own RollApp. So here we're creating it for your own RollApp. And we want to make sure that you understand what you get out of your own RollApp, which includes, for example, as I discussed today, the creation and distribution of those tokens, which may or not be interesting to a lot of people. I think it's super, super, super important if you're building crypto applications, because crypto applications live and die by their token. Yeah, that was pretty much it from the questions.
Cool. There was just a new one coming in as you said that. from Sky. I don't know if you have time to answer that final one, and then we can wrap things up.
Yeah. Is the RollApp able to have two tokens, governance token and LST for Dime? So I'll start with the beginning. Does a RollApp have the ability to have two tokens, a governance token and LST for Dime? A RollApp has the ability to have multiple tokens. I think here you mean to mint from the modules. You can mint tokens from ERC contracts as well. So you can have as many tokens as you want on the RollApp. So you can have, for example, the native token as the governance token, and then for the LST to be creating on the smart contract layer, that would create two tokens. You would have the smart contract doing the LST, and then you would have the governance token being minted natively with the module. Does Dymension have a liquidity staking token project? There's one project called Nebulify that they're building a liquid staking token RollApp. Can I build a liquid staking token project and cross-chain my token, sending them to Arbitrum or Ethereum or Cosmos Chain? Yeah, so the way that it works is you bridge over to Dymension, and from Dymension you can bridge to for Cosmos chains, any IBC chain. For Ethereum chains, it would be through a service provider like Wormhole, Axeler, or any new ones that come out in the future.
Awesome. I think that was all the questions then. Thank you so much, Barry, for taking the time to obviously go through everything and then also answer all these questions. It seemed like people were really interested, and some, good comments in the chat. So it seems like people really enjoyed it. And yeah, thank you so much from us. Do you want to say a few final words to the audience before we finish things up?
Yeah, so if you have questions, obviously reach out to me directly on Telegram or on Twitter. Join the Discords, Encode, join Dymension's Discord. If you have questions about deploying RollApps, setting up the Genesis, for example, please look at the docs in the Genesis section, in the launch section, and also feel free to discuss it on Discord. We want to make building and deploying blockchains as simple as possible, as easy as possible, but still at the same time, there are kind of these overhead complexities of what does it mean to create tokens and distribute and inflation. In essence, we're creating these mini digital countries. We're all the creators and emperors of our own digital countries. And, getting it correct is sometimes a balance between doing something crazy and doing something that works. So, we're all here to experiment, and then there's no real way to do something bad. It's just try.
For sure. That's really good advice, really encouraging. And yeah, I just want to echo that as well. We're always happy to help answer any questions, or at least from my end, point you in the right direction. And there will also be all of next week, loads more workshops. So do make sure to join for that as well. And I'm sure that there will be more questions coming up along as we dive deeper kind of into the tech. So don't miss those. And thank you so much, everyone. And I'll see you guys soon.